Well, and today is New Year's Eve, last day of 2015.
Whoopee!
Yeah, and it really calls for doing the usual thing, doesn't it? I mean, the usual thing at the end of the year is a little bit of reflecting back.
A reckoning.
Yeah, and some people also like to look forward and say, this is what's going to be different for me next year. This is my resolution. So I'd like to invite the community to use this as a forum to put out there what it is that was a highlight for you in this past year, and we'll talk about our highlights as hosts here, but we really want to hear that broad diversity of the community. And then also, what do you expect for next year? We really would like you to project a little bit as to what changes can we make? This is a time where, because we've been in the dead of winter, we're heading with the sun getting bigger every day and higher and more of it. We're going to enter a new cycle of growth, and that could be personal as well. So, there's a lot of topics I reflected on last New Year's Eve, and I actually called in on Amanda's show where this topic was, what are your resolutions?
Uh-huh.
And my resolution was to talk about our upcoming show, which was Let's Talk, which we're doing now. And I personally wanted to talk more about the elephant in the room, the thing that we don't talk enough about, but we all know is there. And boy, I look back and what I've been doing all year is talking about a herd of elephants, or there also is a group called A Memory of Elephants. I guess.
Is that the group? Is that the group name?
Yeah, those are the two that I found.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and we say, an elephant never forgets. They have a pretty big brain, and so they have a strong history, and they even care about the deceased. I mean, I've seen stories of elephants who are not wanting to leave their loved one behind, and yet they know they've got to get back to the herd.
That was a wonderful story in 2015, actually, of elephants that came to the house of a man who died, who had been protecting the elephants, and they came without anyone leading them to his house the day after he died, I think.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
And, some people think that what distinguishes us humans is having that emotion.
Oh, yeah,
but
morals.
Clearly, we find lots of mammals, and probably beyond the mammals, the same kinds of emotions that we like to feel that we are unique carriers of. So when I look back on the year, I went to my Facebook news feed, and I post a lot on Facebook, but it helps me get perspective of what's going on in January, February, and I got all the way through June, and I got tired. And I found the common themes where I was commenting and most interested in energy, in climate change, in agriculture, in our water crises, in the ecocide, in the extinction that we're undergoing, around war and terror and colonialism, and then about change and people making news in change, particularly people change the paradigm, women having more empowerment, us seeing indigenous groups rising up and standing up to imperial power and having success with it even. And race was a huge issue because of all of the mass shootings, the police assaults on blacks in particular. That came together this year like no time before, and that political movement has gained huge strength.
Well, so that whole thing of everyone now having a camera in their hands and the police being required to wear body cameras, just imagine how much of that was going on without anyone knowing about it except the victims and their families. Before this year, really it was this year that has come to the fore. I mean, every day, Alternet, for example, on Facebook, they're showing another instance of police brutality somewhere in the States, usually Texas or Florida, but yeah.
Yes, that's true. It has to do with the technology.
It's a bad story and a good story, right? I mean, it's
the technology,
increasing awareness of problems like that.
The technology finally lets everyone in America see what before was well hidden. The police always managed to cover their tracks, this blue code of silence, where they never talked against a fellow officer. And then we've seen it that the prosecuting district attorneys are buddies with the police and use them as their key witnesses to prosecute. And it's the whole judicial system has been favoring the status quo, which is white, male. And even when there's blacks on the force, that's not the issue. It's the victimization of the poor community, of the black community, of people of color. That has been known, but for most of us invisible, so we didn't talk much about it.
And most of the outrage is that even though there's all that photographic evidence, film evidence, is that these guys are still not being held accountable, really. They're saying, oh, it's within departmental policies. Oh, really? Well, that's great. That will bring about change. Sooner or later, that will change.
Yeah, the Black Lives Matter people are recognizing that it's a structural issue. It's a systemic issue. And they've been great at getting the Democratic presidential candidates to acknowledge that. When they first confronted Bernie, he said, I've got a great record on civil rights. And he does have a good voting record. But in his state and in his world, he never really saw the conditions by which poor blacks live in America. Yeah. And now that he's gone into that subject, he's become a lot stronger. So the Black Lives Matter people who got on stage, got in his face, made a difference in the politics.
Yeah. And speaking of technology, we have a Twitter page for this show, and we're trying it out. It doesn't seem to be working very well, but give us a.
Well, we were talking about race. Go back to Baltimore and what happened with the arrest and then the death of Freddie Gray. And people finally got to, then there was riots, and then why Baltimore burned, we understand. As white people raised in a white supremacist society, we are racist. It is impossible to work to end racism without acknowledging the deep-seated racism that is taught to us at a very young age. White activists need not feel guilty about this, but rather we shall feel obligated to dismantle racism, both inside ourselves and externally. So I found that quote, and I was really happy with it. And also, you can go back. I mean, there's such a history of racism in this country. One was when Wells Fargo Bank first pushed subprime mortgages on thousands of black families in Baltimore. At that time, they referred to them as mud people, the loan officers.
Wow.
And then they foreclosed on those homes, and then Baltimore's black youth threw rocks. Not one single banker was arrested or for destroying the community. But, of course, the blacks who threw the rocks, they were arrested. And so we have it so deeply seated in our institutions, that kind of racism. And
Yeah, so how about personal reflections on the year? What happened in your lives that has made 2015 stand out? Anything?
Yes, it's all a big mess for me. Looking back on the last year, I'm finding it hard to stay positive or optimistic. And part of that is that, all the big news stories, as you said, are centered around violence and terrorism and fear. And it seems to me that things are intensifying on all of those fronts. And at the same time, my father died this year, and in a very ugly kind of way. I don't know if death is ever a good thing, but it wasn't a good death. It was really messy and fractured my family. And that happened actually January the 25th last year. So it's coming up on a year anniversary, and most of this year is a big blur for me. I don't remember several months, and there's nothing like losing a parent, is there? When you lose a parent, it's very foundational. I had no idea it was going to be such a shocker. And anyway, death is a big transitioner, isn't it? And I think you could speak to that too.
Huge. Oh, yeah. Well, I lost my beloved Donna on April 16th, by her own choice, though, which was very different from perhaps your dad's. Yeah.
Yes.
And so, yes. Oh, and the great thing, that's great news for 2016. At some point in 2016, California's End-of-Life Options Act will come into effect. So we'll have pretty much the same laws as Oregon governing the ability to decide if you're terminal, when you can get out of that painful body and get some rest. So, that's a good thing to look forward to, I think, to people to be able to have that. How about you, Bernie? What happened?
Well, at a family level, very little. I mean, I'm very blessed. Everyone's healthy. Everyone's fine. We survived another year. At a personal level, I'm fine, except for my frustrations about my activism. I mean, I feel fortunate that we got this show off the ground in the summer, and it's an outlet for me to focus some of my concern, my frustration, because as I stand back and see what has happened, I don't see that our consciousness is being raised nearly quickly enough. But I do see a lot more acceptance of climate change as a reality. Obviously, the Pope coming out was huge. We have had climate weather stories continuously, and so the evidence keeps mounting. And I don't think the question is anymore, should we deny climate change or not? Let those who want to deny it, and just ignore them. But all of the folks who accept that it's human-made, I think the problem for me comes in is whether you believe that the solutions are as easy as buying green and converting your electrical source to renewables.
Right, we all want the quick fix. Right?
Yeah, and in that, I feel like very little progress has been made this year, and it's mostly a digging in of disinvestment of fossil fuels as if that's the main problem, and the focus on the parts per million, et cetera. But let's hear what a caller thinks.
Hey, you guys, this is Charlie. How you doing?
Oh, good morning.
Hi, Charlie.
Welcome to Let's Talk.
Yeah, well, I've been listening to you while I've been working away here. Thematically, as you open, I'm working at Elephant Cottage, by the way.
Oh, nice.
I don't know where that is, up here in Marshall. But
how are the elephants this morning?
Oh, they're doing fine. I also noticed that they outlawed elephants being pushed around in the circus anymore.
Hey, that's great news.
Yeah, that is progress.
Because they show that the animals are really being tortured. But when you were talking about more cameras out there domestically, police cameras and cameras that people have, and I mean, I'm almost thinking that it's almost like a responsibility of a citizen to have a phone that they could actually take a movie of,
Right.
with, or pictures where there's some police brutality. But
isn't it sad, Charlie, that we no longer take the word of the witnesses who saw it and could testify to be anywhere near equal to what the policeman writes down after a week of consultation with his lawyer?
Yeah, it's a flaw in the judicial system. But what I also wanted to touch on was, with all the pictures that we have ever since Rodney King,
Yep.
We're still getting lied to and not being shown pictures about the wars that our troops are in. When Vietnam was on, you could sit down every night and watch U.S. soldiers in Viet Cong being killed on your TV set. And boy, after that war, the Army just clamped right down on the press and everybody else, and the press sort of, went along with it. And in this year, I'd like to see more direct footage of what the soldiers are doing in all these countries. I mean, how many wars are we fighting now? I can't count that high. But I would like to see that kind of video, and see the press sort of come up and, take its rightful place to sort of, push the Army, off its high horse and show us what Americans are really doing and going through in all these foreign countries.
Yeah, when they started embedding journalists, right, which was code for only the journalists who go along with the military point of view are allowed, right?
Yeah.
You were mentioning years at war. You know that we've been at war for 222 years out of the 239 years since 1776.
Yeah.
So we're at permanent war.
What were the Marines doing in the halls of Montezuma anyway?
But I got to ask you, Charlie, I don't disagree that the pictures will move the population, but there's sort of this notion that there's good wars and bad wars, and the videos will point out that they're not as good as we think they are. But haven't we all learned already that no war actually succeeds in what we're trying to accomplish? Why can't we learn that?
Well, I don't know. My brother and I were lucky because we were both draftable during Vietnam, and our father, who had been a combat veteran of the South Pacific, took us aside and said, do not go into the Army. Whatever you do, don't do it. He said, I'll hide you, I'll send you to Canada, I'll do whatever you want, but don't go into this war especially. And I'm afraid a lot of people didn't have that kind of support for what they were believing in. But yeah, it's true, good wars. I mean, I think Born on the 4th of July is a great story.
It is.
Because the book and the movie both open with the protagonist's hometown having a 4th of July parade. And Ron Kovic was born on the 4th of July. And they've been rolling off of World War II forever. You're absolutely right. They're trying to, make everything look like it's a good war. And, we just don't see a clear picture. We don't, we get stories from the military about the American woman soldier who was supposedly raped and tortured, and it turned out that an Iraqi doctor fixed her up so she could live. Mm-hmm. And Pat Tillman, the great football player from U of A and also the Arizona Cardinals, who became a Ranger and got shot, and the Army completely, warped the story of his death because he was killed by his own people, essentially.
Friendly fire, right?
Friendly fire. How friendly can that be?
Charlie, what are you looking forward to coming up in next year?
Well, I think your talk right before you pick me up is kind of on the table. There's no rug to sweep everything under. The way our environment, that which supports us, it's we're crapping in our own nest. I think I can say that on the radio. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to people getting directly involved in demanding that, because basically we're being killed slowly.
Well, you're so right, and thank you, Charlie, for being a regular listener and a regular caller. We really appreciate your contribution.
Okay, and I'm really a regular guy, too.
Happy New Year, Charlie. Get back to work now, will you?
Yeah, right, get back to work.
And, hey, we did get a tweet. So the Twitter feed is working. But Rick says, clarify, it's all one word. Let's talk on KWMR. It's at Let's Talk on KWMR. No apostrophe in there. So we have another call. All right.
Good morning. Welcome to KWMR. You're on the air. What's your name, please?
Well, this is a little friendly fire here.
Aww.
The real Marshall Charlie.
Hello, Charles.
Hi, Charles.
Wait,
another regular. This is good.
There's 2 Charleses in Marshall now.
None of them working. I would just like to remind everyone of the amazing Criswell. Does anyone remember the amazing Criswell?
Tell us who the amazing
No.
Criswell is.
Well, he is probably most famous for being an associate of Ed Wood's and appearing in some of Ed Wood's films.
Uh-huh.
But he wrote a book in 1968, Criswell Predicts, from now into the year 2000.
Oh.
So these things have already happened, but may not have been observed yet. I'd like to point out this one. Denver will be struck by a ray from space that will cause all metal to adopt the qualities of rubber, leading to horrific accidents at amusement parks. He also predicts mass cannibalism and the end of planet Earth, which is set to happen on August 18th, 1999. Incidentally, my grandmother's birthday.
Ah.
The 1999
How
report. But he had a great tagline. At the end of his predictions, he would say, "We are all interested in the future because that is where we are going to spend the rest of our lives."
And what could be more true than that? That is truly amazing.
Yes, and actually, this is for you, Mr. Raffel. At the end of his life, he became disillusioned. He said that he lost the gift of clairvoyance. I had the gift, quote, but I lost it when I started taking money for it. Don't pay your clairvoyance. It's hurting them. It's hurting you.
So do you have any predictions for 2016?
I'm going to be semi-sober some of the time.
Well, that's a good goal. That's good.
For 2016.
Is that like 50-50, are we talking?
50-50. No, I don't know. I don't have any predictions.
Okay.
But
what was a big event that surprised you this last year or really got your attention?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's so many things, and they tend, like Charlie, to be very very depressing. And it's good to at least remind yourself of those things. I won't list a sort of catalog of them, but there's a lot of sort of distressing kind of news. I think the mentality of the prediction is very interesting. It's a weird kind of vanity and lack of self-awareness to predict. But I think that it's going to be exciting in 2016, and I think that we find lots of things, say, about our political discourse, our relationship with other people, the places that we live, often to be frightening and even humiliating, to make contact with other people, to get involved in your local politics or get involved just in hanging out with people and sharing meals and having a good time. So I would say for 2016, push through the humiliation and just do it. Go meet your neighbors. I was in Inverness Park the other day, standing on somebody's roof, and I'm just pointing at his direct neighbors, and I said, "Do you know that person? No. This no. He'd lived there for 30 years. He didn't know anybody who lived adjacent to him, not even the names." So go meet your neighbors.
When you were on the roof, had you been
in a red suit?
In a red.
Were you trying to get down the chimney?
Oh, that's right. That's right. Saint Nick, a thief. And
breaking and entering again.
I promised I would find as many opportunities as possible to use this phrase. It's an Irish expression for cleaning a chimney. The blacker the goose, the cleaner the chimney. So that's
oh, jeez.
So let's talk today.
Thanks, Charles.
All right, take care, guys.
Happy New Year.
Charles.
Happy New Year.
So as we look back, as I look back, obviously a lot of the discussion were around guns, the mass shootings we had. The Charleston church shooting was interesting. Here's a young black man who felt that from what he understood, black people were the problem. He went.
It wasn't
to
a black male; it was a white male, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was a white young man who had sort of learned from his redneck culture, if you will. Black people were the problem, and he wanted to help that cause. So, and then the survivors of the victims forgave him. You know, they came from a church setting where forgiveness was something they preached, but boy, to witness it and to see it firsthand, to be that big and to feel like, we can do that, even though this was a horrific act that did such terrible things. And, of course, ultimately from that, one of the good that came out is, was it South Carolina with their rebel flag flying on state property? It was taken down. And so there was a push to make something of that. But this mass shooting thing is both, the internal terrorists. I would call that terrorism, just like I would consider anyone shooting at a Planned Parenthood facility a terrorist. But this whole idea of terrorism keeps growing because of the availability of guns. And we've got to eventually deal with this because this country is in love with our guns. We did a show on guns. The president is frustrated as can be. He would like the Congress to be tougher, and yet the control of the gun industry, as manifest through the NRA, has total control over political system, and yet California legislature moves forward.
Right.
We've got some of the stronger gun laws, yet then San Bernardino happens, and away.
Yeah, we've got 329 mass shootings in 2015, and if you look at the map online of all the mass shootings, a lot of them are in California.
Yeah.
I don't know about stricter gun controls. I don't like guns and I don't want to use them, but I don't. That's not the problem, I don't think. Yeah.
Well, the Second Amendment and people with their history of guns keeps them so available that anyone, and we see young men throughout the world get angry and get violent. And if all you got is a stick or your fists, you're not going to as likely kill people as you can with these semi-automatics that can fire off bullets.
I know, but if the police have guns and the military-industrial complex has guns and we don't, that's kind of a problem too, isn't it?
It is. It is.
But you're never going to be able to fight that force. I mean, let's face it.
Let's face it.
Yeah, I do understand that some people want their gun for that reason, so that they can push back on the tyrant. But you're right. There's no way.
They have firepower.
They have won the firepower battle.
Not available at all to other people.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
Well, another big story this year, of course, has been ISIS. This has been the after effects of the Middle East war that started Afghanistan, went to Iraq, dealt with Syria. It has roots in climate change. There indeed were reasons that people in Syria stood up to their government, and then the question of whether there were chemical gases used on the citizens or not, and that got escalated. But it's turned this year into something where now countries are competing. It's England, France, the United States, Russia. They all want to bomb in Syria, in Iraq, and ISIS has been a unifying front for a lot of the world to, I think, get us into World War III, it seems.
Absolutely.
This is sort of insanity.
It's total insanity.
And everyone wants to bomb some part of the Kurds. either the Kurds in Turkey or the Kurds in Syria. The Kurds were the ones who are actually succeeding against ISIS with some backing from others. But anyway.
We have presidential candidates who debate who can be tougher on ISIS. Who will they more be afraid of? And
such a joke, isn't it?
It seems to be, but I hear no one talking about, like, can we consider why we are even in the area? What are we doing there? Mm-hmm. Are we really there to protect our democracy at home, to protect our citizens at home? Or are we there to exploit those nations with the relieving them of their resources? I mean, taking that dirty oil so they don't have to deal with it, and bringing it here and building pipelines. And that's why we're really there. But that doesn't get talked about.
It's the oil that keeps the military going. So
what
it's this big cycle of destruction that keeps on going and going and going. Because the military uses more oil than anybody else in the world. So, yes, they need that oil, so they go and fight wars on top of the oil so that they can get more.
Did you ever hear that talked about?
No,
the real
really.
reasons.
Well, you have to dig into the real news sites.
Not since the Iraq War started, when everyone was well aware of what was going on. But we've sort of become inured to it now, haven't we? I mean,
but we're all kept terrified by the mass media here, and that is also a strategy for controlling us here and keeping us subdued and good consumers and not questioning the status quo and not rising up in resistance movements or revolution. And
we were talking about the media's role in covering war. Charlie brought that up, and seeing more video like we did in Vietnam. I do believe the media is a big part of keeping us in fear of showing the kind of that these are evil people, and it's framing everything in terms of we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, and look at what those bad guys are doing. They're slitting the throats, but we're not covering the drone attacks where those people are living in fear all day long of if they gather in too big a crowd or the young men gather, that might be cause for the U.S. to think it's a ISIS gathering.
Mm-hmm.
It's awful for Muslims in this country right now as well. And back in England, I was looking online. I mean, this war on terror is really fueling racism too.
Yeah. In most of Europe, actually, right?
Yes.
Closing borders and stuff.
Well, the migration has been a shock. I don't think anyone predicted that last year, even though those folks in the Middle East have been under tremendous adversity with the bombing of their buildings, their institutions. But all of a sudden, it seemed that both from Africa, people were crossing the Mediterranean, and from the Middle East into Greece and then up into Europe. And boy, that really showed what governments, what people are willing to stand up. Angela Merkel in Germany stood up to say, we welcome, like 85,000 or some large number. And she took a real leadership role there. Since then, she's getting a lot of backlash in that country where there's still a lot of people like here, far right, saying, what are we doing, letting all these...
Well, the U.S. isn't letting anybody in, are they?
Well, we are. We've committed to some relatively small numbers, but the politics is all about, we already have a 2-year vetting process for them. It's like, that's not enough for Donald Trump. And so they says none at all. And that racism that keeps showing, that fascism that keeps showing, that should worry us.
It's ugly.
Yeah, but it is a large percentage of the people of the Western world. It's not a U.S. phenomenon. We can see Europe doing exactly the same thing, but it's everyone wanting to scapegoat by the foreigners are part of the problem. We poor people here, where our economic system has been taking a hit, aren't willing to blame it on our past excesses or an energy shift or climate problems. We're much more willing to say it's those other people.
Yeah, I mean, can I take a shift here even to say that, before my dad died, one of the bumper stickers he gave me that's on the back of my car is, at least the war on the environment is going well. And lots of people take pictures of that and say, I like your bumper sticker, which is not very funny, really, when you think about it. But, I mean, that's the real war, isn't it? It's the war on the environment and the ecology, and nobody's really talking about that either. That is really the big news, the species diversity that's declining, the climate change that you just mentioned, and maybe we can talk about that for a bit. News of the last year.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you're putting perspective on this, because we can easily get trapped in our political world. We can easily get focused on our economic lives, but underlying all of that is the very basis of life. And why do we think we can manage our way out of, as we use up that that life, destroy it permanently.
Improving on it, by the way. We're managing nature.
Yeah. And we can manage our toxics so that we can let Mongolia go off because, of course, we need our iPhones to communicate these messages of how good we're doing.
Right.
I've seen a lot of people so in love with the technology that they're not willing to look at what's behind it.
Sure.
They'll say such things as, my iPhone doesn't use very much electricity at all. But they're not going into what did it take to manufacture that product, or when you go use it and you're going from database to database, when you're surfing around the world from server to server, that electricity is much greater than what you needed to plug it in at night. But that's all people want to look at is this is my little world, and that's somebody else's problem.
And the jury's still out on the effects of the radiation.
Fukushima?
From cell phones.
Oh, cell phones, yeah. Oh, sorry,
all that
I just
Wi-Fi
switched
and
to...
all that stuff.
Yeah.
There are a couple. I was looking at what's coming up in the California new laws for 2016. There is one that is microbeads are going to be outlawed by 2020 in 4 years' time. Microbeads are in everything now, apparently. They put them in all kinds of facial scrubs and cosmetics and all kinds of stuff. They're not only being absorbed into our systems, they're being put out into the world, of course, and animals are suffering because of that, and finally something's been done about that. What else? Oh, there was the Fish and Wildlife in California is now actually going to get funding to try and create and preserve monarch butterfly habitat. Probably too late, unfortunately, but anyway, that's some relatively good news for 2016.
Yeah, I actually went to look at the salmon spawning as well in Lagunitas Creek, and apparently the numbers are up. At least they're not up dramatically, but there's more of them this time of year than there was last year, at the same time of year.
That's such a great local touchstone.
Yes.
And when they start running and people start reporting it, I get excited too. And go to that viewing area there by Shafter Bridge off Sir Francis Drake, and you can't help but see them. And when they're jumping at the inkwells, I mean, what a sight.
And the elephant seals are pupping.
Exactly.
We
Beautiful.
have, good news stories, don't we?
Yeah, no, it is great to see nature doing well and not have gone off the brink yet.
Well, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
That's not a completely true statement,
okay,
is it, Bertie?
I know. We just stand back.
Stand by. So, the World Wildlife Fund released that, the Living Planet report last year. Do you remember 2014? And that said that 52% of the vertebrate species have disappeared in the last 40 years. Do you remember that report?
50%.
52%.
Yikes.
And that's just in the last 40 years. And then, so they only do that report every 2 years. So it's not out till next year, which I presume will be worse. But they did produce a Living Blue Planet report this year, which is the state of the oceans, because they figured the situation was really urgent. And they found comparable, 52% of vertebrate species have disappeared in the last 40 years in the oceans. But that it's actually much, much worse. The oceans are actually degrading at a much higher rate much faster rate than the land species, and we're more dependent on the oceans. Apparently, that all the vertebrate species could disappear and humans could still survive. But if all the ocean life disappears, we're sunk.
Well, the entire planet. It is the blue planet.
It is the blue planet. So then, we are in the throes of the sixth great extinction. And then on some local news, I've been noticing here just over the last few years, going out to Limantour, how many trees appear to be dying from so-called bark beetles. So I looked into that, and apparently, bark beetles, which they say could be coming up because of drought, have killed over 22 million trees in California as of October. And Governor Jerry Brown declared that a state of emergency and said, quote, "It's the worst epidemic of tree mortality in modern history." Now, that's not front page news either. That's very hidden that he said
that. So what
are
they going to do about that? Are they going to
I read yesterday
insecticides? Or?
Well, apparently it's worse than that. Apparently, I read yesterday that they're setting up biomass plants now and are going to burn all these trees and create energy from them, which is not a good idea. But then also, my own personal experiences, last solstice, I witnessed all these die-offs. Remember Cason's auklets, and then this year it was common mures, and I've seen pelicans and seabirds and sea mammals, and the scientists are coming in. This isn't me being panic monster. This is actually true, that they're saying, and you can look it up yourself, that California coast is turning into a desert. The water is becoming clear, and all of the ocean life is dying off. I think it's not just California. I think it's probably Washington and Oregon as well. And, they're saying it's El Nino or Fukushima. Nobody really knows actually why this is happening, but that's pretty dire, guys.
The upwelling is not happening? Is that the...
Right.
Yeah, I mean, when we hear these books come out about the sixth mass extinction, a lot of people view that, well, that's the direction we're headed. That's far in the future. But scientists are actually in studies finding that they'll expect 75% of all animal species wiped out because of the disappearing habitats and the climate change and the compounding of our toxics. And like Stanford declared back in March through research that the sixth mass extinction is already here. Paul Ehrlich and others use highly conservative estimates to prove that species are disappearing faster than any time since the dinosaurs' demise. So you're right to point out that it's happening in front of our eyes. And I'm constantly talking to people who shrug it off as it's in the future. It's not now.
It's happening.
Yeah, it's happening. And just like climate change is happening, but we're not reporting that either. We're not talking about that.
But the climate change it's definitely getting weirder, climate, isn't it? I mean, this week there was this weird El Nino pattern going over the Arctic. Remember, what did you say to me outside?
Marshall was colder this morning than the North Pole.
Yes, the North Pole is 50 degrees warmer than it usually is right now, and it's raining up there, which is an unprecedented, never before heard of event.
No. So local. We were talking about local. We got a tweet from Murray. Thank you, Murray. He says, "My focus is local. For example, teaching my grandson how to play piano. Just about all the good in my life is close to home."
Aww.
And Richard sent a test transmission. It came in, Richard. Well done. So, yes, the tweets are working. At Let's Talk on KWMR.
Very cool. Well, let me talk a little bit about local, because that is the one direction that most people can easily accept as our solutions need to be found locally to fight globalism and all that it has associated with it that's wrong. The antidote to globalism is living radically local. And a lot of people get that. So, one of the places I just had a conversation on Facebook with a friend who's talking about the Giants and all these sports teams and stuff. And I asked him to consider cheering for the local high school and the rec league and finding the kids in the community that could use that same level of attention and encouragement that we give to these $100 million players that stand out. And same with entertainment. We love to love one superstar that's on television. Yet we're overlooking the talent that exists in every village. That in every school, there is talent that needs encouragement. And if we were more local in our entertainment, if we were more local in making our own music rather than worrying about the copyrights to some song.
Sure. Well, that's a wonderful thing. So there's something that is getting more play is localization, right, of power sources. Charles, who called in earlier, is in the local power business. There's localization of food production. There's buying local has become a huge thing, a big slogan.
Food we're very well attuned to, I think, here because we have the food producers here. The farmers markets are like an outstanding solution that really shows us how we can change from thinking we have to buy all these processed foods to finding local growers for them. I'm not so sure about the energy yet. I think we haven't accepted the idea that we need to live with less energy. We take the 24/7 electric grid for granted, and we think we can buy anything and just plug it in. I'm reminded I was in Japan for a short time, and I learned that you can't buy a new car until you prove that you have a place to park it. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Could you imagine now that you can't buy a new electric car or electric appliance unless you prove that you can somehow supply enough energy to run that yourself? I mean, we're not thinking like that. We think of it's a a swap out, and the local there is about local decisions to buy renewables, but it's still buying into the idea of wind farms and a lot of solar projects, et cetera, and really not challenging us to say, let's live with a lot less electricity and only use that where we really have no good alternatives. But, that's the hard part. We're living very affluent lives here, and we're looking at a world where what allowed that to happen is crumbling in many ways. Economically, the debt problem is huge. This is where I agree with Ron Paul, the father, who's definitely a libertarian, and he's calling for the fact that if all the debt were called, it's not solvable. Our country, the world, none of the global financial system that we all live under can really sustain itself like you would ask a government to have a budget that pays for everything at a state level. We can't do that anymore. So the truth is that has to be kept afloat to keep it from collapsing. And I, for one, actually think good news is when it collapses. I know most people would view that as a horrendous burden, and I know it'll be difficult and it'll hurt a lot of people. But the sooner it happens, the sooner we can rethink our paradigm.
Think it'll happen this coming year?
Well, we're getting closer and closer. I don't quite see it yet. But
do you think there will be sabotage of the economy before the election?
I think the unraveling will continue. We saw how in Greece they had a major crisis, financial crisis, that apparently Germany and the rest of Europe bailed out Greece to impose austerity on them. But the people there pushed back, and a lot of what's happening in Greece is now outside of the economy, where people are doing their village soup kitchens and in other ways, and free doctor care and health care outside of the system, so that the black market starts flourishing when the formal economic system is the screws are turned on it. And now we hear about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is insolvent. They're looking for the U.S. government, the federal government, to bail them out, and the Congress doesn't want to. The president does. But we're going to see more of those dominoes. So I don't think we'll have worldwide collapse next year. I'd like it, but we'll definitely have unraveling. And to predict the unraveling, how it'll occur, I don't think makes much sense.
I can just see with my vision ahead that it's all going to get a lot worse, guys.
Yeah.
And before it gets anything like better.
Give us a call. 415-663-8492. If you have do you have a rosy vision for 2016? We'd love to hear it.
Can I share my rosy vision?
Yes.
I mean, I do feel that, and then I've got my New Year's resolutions. Should I tell you what some of them are? They're quite rosy, Bernie.
All right, go for it.
Yeah.
I'm going to get off Facebook, guys. I need to get off Facebook. I really do. Okay. And I'm going to more time outside in nature, and I'm going to have a more simple lifestyle. I'm trying to immerse myself back in an ancestral Lifeway primitive skills community, which I've diverted from lately. I'm going to give up coffee. That's going to be a tough one.
Cool.
And then I'm going to eat more wild foods and keep tracking and writing and creating. And I do a lot of dance, so I like to keep dancing, keep speaking truth to power. This radio show's been great for that, and I still want to do that. And I want to keep doing grief work and releasing grief and keeping up my gratitude practice and continuing to take action, however small and however hopeless I sometimes feel it is, just to keep taking those steps to create change and to cultivate more kindness and compassion.
There you go.
Well, I think that's very important, and to model that and help your son, who's certainly in a stage where he's learned so much, and what he learns and what is relevant to the future is so important. And
Thank you.
You are caring about that and going at the deeper level rather than the superficial level of will he get into Harvard, which is what a lot of parents think is the ultimate solution. And you're seeing it much more, will he be able to cope with a changing world?
Yeah, I just don't even know if Harvard is going to exist in 20 years.
Yeah, and who cares?
Well, quite precisely, Bernie.
You can tell I didn't go to Harvard.
But I just want him to be skilled and fulfilled and creative and able to adapt. And I don't really know what that looks like, but I need to help create that for him, yeah.
Well,
so
I
that's
think
my
that's
positive vision.
Adaptability is going to be very important, of course. I think it always has been. We've kind of lost track of that because, this career civilization that's been built up around capitalism, everyone has a career. Well, that is all unraveling already. Remember when you used to have a job all your life and you'd have a pension at the end of it as your reward, and that was what you worked for? That is gone now, right? I mean, unless you're working for the feds or government,
Well,
I mean, that's still there. But, all that, it calls for adaptability and resilience. And how do you do that in a world in which the climate is making the current systems almost untenable? And there's going to be huge change on many levels. And I'm, certainly the economic collapse is on its way at some point, whether it's next year or in 5 years. So things are going to change, and if you don't have skills, just even rudimentary skills, then you are going to be in real trouble.
Raven, I so congratulate you on finding what is the most important part of being a parent, and you're doing that, and you're committing wholeheartedly to it. I'm so there. For me, as a grandparent now, I don't have direct charge of children, and my kids are struggling just to make it through every day and through life, and it's not easy, and I want to give as much support there. But I think that what I want to do more than anything is help raise awareness. I think we need to change our thinking. We're all stuck in a paradigm of thinking that is reinforced by all the institutions that currently exist, and we can't think outside of that box. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, it's clear to me that box is going to collapse, so we better start anticipating thinking in a new paradigm. And I think that's the sort of thing that happens when it happens. Like when we have a natural disaster, we have a big storm come through, it floods, when there's a big fire, neighbors instinctually come together. Mm-hmm. And I think that we are going to be wanting to get together for our self-preservation as we see more of the existing institutions collapse. Mm-hmm. But the more that we can anticipate that that's likely, the easier it is to accept when it happens. You hear these stories when the stock market goes down in one day. These men want to jump off the bridge and kill themselves because they think their only value is in the portfolio of stocks that now was cut its value in half or something. And that's like, for them, that's the end of the world. Right. And that's because they're so zoomed in, and so nothing in their life matters except the value of their portfolio.
It's a terrible outlet. It's a terrible way to live. I mean, when your life is centered around how much money you can amass, how much stuff you can have. Boy, there's a lot of that going on. The 1%ers and the 0.1%ers are the ones who are trying to keep all that going and keep the rest of us down. And but I don't know.
What about you,
2016? Paul? Is that going to be? Is it going to be a big issue? Is that really going to change? What's going to change?
What are you going to do in 2016? What are your resolutions?
I'm resolving, like you, to be kinder, more compassionate, and to cultivate love in my life. That's my first thing. And I don't know. I don't like making resolutions because most of the time, it used to be something like, I'm going to give up smoking. Well, I did that. I think it's just a personal outlook on life to understand what is going on, to have a clear feeling, a clear knowledge as much as I can of what's actually happening in the world, but not to get too depressed and obsessed by it all because there's still human interaction. There are still wonderful people all around us, and that's really what counts. It's not the big picture is something that every person individually will have to deal with at some point. So as long as you're healthy and you're resilient, and loving and community-minded and can have people around you in that way, that's really what matters for humans, us humans.
What about you, Bernie? Closing thoughts?
Well, one of the things I see happening is that energy will, I think, become an issue comes to the forefront. Right now, people are not realizing that a lot of the war in Syria is off of gas fields in the eastern Mediterranean off the shore. Gaza was the Israelis also claiming the shore rights to fuel there. We've got a surplus of fuel because of fracking in this country. The Congress is allowing it now to be sold to other countries. So the surplus will disappear. The gas prices that are so low right now will skyrocket. So I believe that'll be another good news. Good news for me would be gas at $20 a gallon.
I believe
The big crunch.
Well, I'd like to thank all our listeners all year long and today, and our callers, especially today, for your participation. And I hope you'll tune in every Thursday 11 because your voice really does matter. And Happy New Year to everyone.